What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down for what should be a simple morning show interview only to find himself facing an ambush from a host with a hidden agenda? The answer is about to shock you. And trust me, you'll want to stick around for every explosive moment of this incredible confrontation. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really motivated this attack, because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about morning television. The studio lights were blazing bright that morning as Harrison Ford settled into the familiar chair across from George Stephanopoulos. The veteran actor had done hundreds of these interviews over the decades, promoting everything from Star Wars to Indiana Jones, and he expected this one to follow the usual script. A few softball questions about his latest project, maybe some nostalgic chat about his iconic roles, and then he'd be on his way. But from the moment the cameras started rolling, something felt different. "Harrison, great to have you back on Good Morning America," George began, his trademark smile seeming somehow more forced than usual. "I have to say, your new film looks incredible, but before we dive into that, I'm curious about something else entirely." Ford raised an eyebrow, his weathered face showing just a hint of confusion. He'd been expecting to talk about his upcoming action thriller, not whatever tangent George seemed ready to pursue. "Sure, George. Shoot." "Well, I've been doing some research and I came across some interesting financial records from your production company." George leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on that investigative tone he'd perfected during his political journalism days. "Care to explain why your company received a rather substantial tax break last year while publicly supporting higher taxes for the wealthy?" The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Ford's expression shifted from mild confusion to genuine surprise, then to something approaching annoyance. This wasn't what they discussed in the pre-in. This wasn't what his publicist had been told to expect. "I'm sorry, George, but I thought we were here to talk about the movie," Ford replied, his voice measured, but with a clear edge creeping in. "My accountants handle the business side of things. I focus on making films." But George wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by Ford's obvious discomfort. "Come on, Harrison. You can't tell me you don't know about a 6F tax incentive. That's not exactly pocket change, even for someone of your stature. What exactly are you implying here?" Ford's famous growl was starting to emerge. The same tone that had made Han Solo and Indiana Jones so memorable, but now it carried real irritation. George's smile grew wider, more predatory. "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking direct questions about what appears to be a contradiction between your public statements and your private financial dealings. Don't you think the American people deserve transparency from their celebrities? Especially when those celebrities are lecturing them about paying their fair share." The studio audience, which had been buzzing with excitement about seeing the legendary actor, fell completely silent. Even the crew members seemed to sense that something was going very wrong very quickly. Ford shifted in his chair, clearly wrestling with how to respond to what was obviously an orchestrated attack. "Listen, George, I came here in good faith to talk about a project I'm passionate about," Ford said, his voice getting more intense with each word. "If you want to play go-to journalism, maybe you should have been upfront about that instead of sandbagging me on live television." "Sandbagging?" George's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "I'm just doing my job as a journalist. Surely someone who's been in the public eye as long as you have understands that fair questions come with the territory." "Fair questions?" Ford let out a harsh laugh. "Is that what you call fishing expeditions based on documents you've clearly been digging through without any context or understanding? You want to talk about fair? How about giving me a heads up about your little investigation instead of trying to embarrass me in front of millions of viewers?" The tension in the studio was now palpable. George, however, seemed to be enjoying every moment of it. He shuffled through some papers on his desk with theatrical precision, clearly savoring the discomfort he was causing one of America's most beloved actors. "Harrison, I think you're being a bit defensive here," George said, his tone now dripping with condescension. "These aren't personal attacks. They are legitimate questions about public figures and their responsibilities. If you have nothing to hide, why not just answer them?" Ford's jaw tightened visibly. "I'm not being defensive. I'm being set up and we both know it. You brought me here under false pretenses, ambushed me with accusations disguised as questions, and now you're trying to paint my reasonable objection as guilt. That's not journalism, George. That's a hit job." "A hit job?" George's voice rose slightly, and for the first time, his mask slipped just a bit, revealing something uglier underneath. "I'm sorry if holding public figures accountable feels like a hit job to you, But that's exactly the kind of entitled attitude that regular Americans are sick of hearing from Hollywood elites. The phrase Hollywood elites landed like a slap. Ford's eyes narrowed and his entire demeanor changed. The confused and slightly annoyed actor was disappearing, replaced by someone who clearly wasn't going to take this lying down. Hollywood elites, Ford repeated slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. That's interesting, George. Tell me, what exactly makes me more elite than a former presidential advisor-turned-television host who makes millions of dollars asking loaded questions designed to generate controversy rather than inform the public? Now, it was George's turn to look uncomfortable, but he quickly recovered, leaning back in his chair with a smug expression. The difference, Harrison, is that I don't lecture the American people about their moral obligations while quietly taking advantage of the very system I criticize. And what system would that be exactly? Ford shot back. The system where accountants and lawyers handle complex financial matters while I focus on my actual profession. Or are you talking about the system where morning show hosts manufacture scandals out of perfectly legal business practices because they need ratings? The exchange was escalating rapidly, and everyone in the studio could feel it. George's producer was making frantic gestures from behind the cameras, clearly trying to signal for a commercial break. But George seemed oblivious. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. He was committed to this path now, and there was no turning back. You know what, George? Ford said, his voice cutting through the studio tension like a knife. Since you want to talk about systems and accountability, let's have that conversation. Let's talk about the system where a former Clinton advisor gets to play impartial journalist while conveniently forgetting to mention his own conflicts of interest. George's confident smirk faltered for just a moment. I'm not sure what you're implying, Harrison. I'm not implying anything, Ford replied, turning George's earlier words back on him. I'm asking direct questions. Isn't that what journalists do? So, here's my question. When you interview politicians, do you always disclose your previous relationships with them? Do you tell your viewers about the dinner parties, the fundraisers, the personal connections that might color your supposedly objective reporting? The studio fell even quieter if that was possible. George shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly not expecting the tables to be turned so effectively. My background is well known. Harrison, it's not a secret that I worked in politics before transitioning to journalism. Working in politics, Ford repeated with a bitter laugh. That's a nice way to put it. You were knee-deep in partisan battles, making decisions that affected millions of Americans, and now you sit here pretending to be some neutral arbiter of truth. At least when I play a character, everyone knows it's make-believe. George's face was starting to flush red. I resent the implication that I'm not a legitimate journalist. I've won awards for my reporting. Awards from who, George? From the same media establishment that you're part of. From the same people who attend the same parties, share the same worldview, and pat each other on the back for their supposed objectivity. Ford was gaining momentum now, and his years of dealing with Hollywood politics were serving him well. You want to talk about elite bubbles? Let's talk about the bubble where former political operatives get to reinvent themselves as impartial truth tellers while attacking actors for having accountants. This is ridiculous, George snapped, his professional composure cracking more with each exchange. We're not here to discuss my credentials. We're here because you have questions to answer about your financial dealings. No, George. We're here because you thought you could ambush me for cheap ratings. Ford fired back. But since you brought up financial dealings, let's talk about yours. How much does Disney pay you? How much do you make from speaking engagements? And here's the real question. How many of those speaking fees come from organizations that benefit from the political connections you made while working in the White House? George's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This was clearly not going according to his plan. That's completely different. My financial arrangements are transparent and ethical. Transparent. Ford laughed, but there was no humor in it. To who? When's the last time you disclosed on air how much money you make? When's the last time you told your viewers about potential conflicts of interest before interviewing someone from your old political circles? You want to talk about transparency? Start with yourself. The host was visibly struggling now, sweat beating on his forehead under the hot studio lights. This is a deflection, Harrison. You're trying to change the subject because you can't defend your actions. My actions. Ford's voice rose for the first time, his famous intensity fully engaged. What actions? Having a production company that legally minimizes its tax burden like every other business in America. Working with professionals who understand tax law better than I do. Those are the actions you're so concerned about. It's about integrity, George shot back, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried at the beginning of the interview. It's about practicing what you preach. Integrity, Ford repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. That's rich coming from someone who spent years spinning lies for politicians and now spins different lies for television executives. You want to lecture me about integrity while you're sitting there conducting a character assassination based on half-truths and selective information. George tried to regain control of the situation. Harrison, I think you're overreacting here. These are standard questions that any public figure should be prepared to answer. Standard questions. Ford's eyes blazed. Standard questions are about my movies, my career, maybe my thoughts on the industry. Ambush attacks based on private financial documents that you've somehow gotten your hands on. That's not standard. That's stalking. That's the kind of behavior that would get you arrested if you weren't hiding behind a press badge. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. George's face went from red to pale in an instant. How dare you suggest that I've done anything illegal? Everything I've presented here was obtained through proper journalistic channels. Proper journalistic channels? Ford scoffed. Is that what you call it when you dig through someone's private business records looking for ammunition? When you construct elaborate traps designed to embarrass and humiliate people who trusted you enough to come on your show? If that's journalism, then journalism is dead. George was losing control of the interview completely now, and everyone in the studio could see it. His voice cracked slightly as he tried to reassert his authority. I don't have to sit here and listen to you attack the integrity of this program and this network. Actually, George, you do, Ford replied with deadly calm. You created this situation. You wanted to play hardball, so let's play. You want to question my integrity. Let's question yours. You want to dig into my business? Let's dig into yours. You want to lecture me about responsibility to the public? Let's talk about your responsibility to tell the truth instead of manufacturing scandals. The studio audience was completely silent now, transfixed by what they were witnessing. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong. This was a complete breakdown of the traditional host-guest dynamic, with the guest systematically dismantling the host's credibility on live television. George made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Harrison, I think we need to take a step back here. You're obviously upset, but attacking me personally isn't going to change the facts about your tax situation. The facts? Ford's voice dripped with contempt. You wouldn't know a fact if it bit you on your sanctimonious behind. You've presented innuendo, suspicion, and guilt by association, but not a single actual fact that suggests any wrongdoing on my part. The only facts here are that you lured me onto your show under false pretenses and then tried to destroy my reputation for the sake of ratings. I did no such thing, George protested weakly. Really? Then explain to me how this interview was supposed to go. Were you planning to ask about my movie at all? Or was this always going to be an hour of character assassination? Were you going to give me a chance to respond to your accusations? Or were you just hoping I'd sit here quietly while you destroyed me? George opened his mouth to respond, but Ford wasn't finished. And here's the real question, George. What did I ever do to you? What personal grudge are you working out here? Because this level of hostility, this degree of preparation for an attack, this doesn't happen by accident. Someone wanted me taken down, and you were happy to be the instrument of that takedown. So, who was it? Which of your political friends decided that Harrison Ford needed to be taught a lesson? The question hit like a physical blow. George's entire body language changed, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of the accusation was too much to bear. For a moment, the mask slipped completely and viewers could see something that looked almost like shame in his eyes. But George quickly recovered, his political training kicking in as he tried to deflect the accusation. Harrison, you're being paranoid. Nobody orchestrated anything. This is simply good journalism holding public figures accountable. Good journalism. Ford's laugh was harsh and bitter. George, I've been in this business for 50 years. I've seen good journalism and I've seen hack jobs. What you're doing here today is the worst kind of hack job dressed up in the language of accountability. You're using your platform to settle scores and generate controversy, not to inform the public. George's facade was crumbling, but he made one final attempt to maintain his authority. I think we should move on to discussing your film now. That's what you came here to talk about, right? Oh, now you want to talk about the movie. Ford's voice was incredulous. After spending the last 20 minutes trying to destroy my reputation, now you want to pretend this is a normal interview. Do you really think you can just flip a switch and go back to friendly chat after what you've done here? Harrison, I understand you're upset, But let's try to salvage something positive from this conversation, George said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that only made things worse. That was the final straw. Ford's eyes blazed with anger as he leaned forward in his chair. Salvage something positive, George. The only positive thing that could come from this conversation is if people see it for what it really is, a perfect example of everything that's wrong with modern media. You've turned journalism into entertainment, investigation into assassination, and truth into whatever serves your agenda. I won't sit here and listen to you lecture me about journalism. George snapped, his own anger finally breaking through his professional veneer. You're an actor, Harrison. You pretend to be other people for a living. What could you possibly know about the responsibilities of real journalists? The insult was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Ford's face darkened, and when he spoke, his voice carried the full force of decades of frustration with media manipulation. What do I know about responsibility? I know that when I take a job, I do it honestly. When I sign a contract, I honor it. When I give my word, I keep it. Can you say the same, George? Can you honestly say that you've honored the trust that viewers place in you when they tune in expecting news and instead get ambush attacks? How dare you question my integrity? George shot back, his voice rising to match Ford's intensity. I've been doing this job for decades. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, and yes, Hollywood actors who think they can lecture the rest of us about how to live while hiding behind their wealth and privilege. There it is, Ford said, his voice suddenly calm again, but with an edge that cut like steel. There's the real George Stephanopoulos, not the impartial journalist, not the seeker of truth, but the bitter political operative who can't stand the fact that some people in Hollywood don't share his worldview. This was never about tax records or accountability. This was about punishing someone who dares to think differently than you do. George's face was now completely flushed, sweat clearly visible under the studio lights. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Ford pressed on relentlessly. Then explain to me why you're so interested in my tax records, but you've never done a similar investigation into other actors with similar arrangements. Explain to me why you ambushed me specifically when there are dozens of celebrities with far more complex financial structures. What makes me so special, George? What makes me worthy of this level of scrutiny? George opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The silence stretched for several seconds, and in that silence, everyone in the studio could feel the weight of the accusation. Ford wasn't finished. I'll tell you what makes me special. I've been vocal about issues you disagree with. I've criticized politicians you support. I've used my platform to express views that conflict with your political agenda. And rather than engage with those views honestly, you decided to try to destroy my credibility by manufacturing a scandal out of routine business practices. That's completely false. George managed to stammer out, but his voice lacked any conviction. Is it? Ford's voice rose again, his famous intensity now fully unleashed. Then why didn't you contact my representatives before this interview? Why didn't you give me a chance to explain these documents in context? Why did you choose to spring this on me in front of a live audience instead of doing the responsible thing and investigating properly? Because you weren't interested in the truth, George. You were interested in the spectacle. The studio was dead silent except for the hum of the cameras. Even the crew members had stopped moving, transfixed by the complete breakdown of what should have been a routine morning show interview. George made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Harrison, I think you need to calm down. You're embarrassing yourself on national television. But Ford was beyond caring about appearances now. Embarrassing myself. George, the only embarrassment here is what you've done to journalism. You've turned it into a weapon, a tool for personal and political vengeance. You've betrayed every principle that real journalists fight to uphold. And you've done it all, while hiding behind the pretense of serving the public interest. Security, George called out suddenly, his voice cracking with desperation. I think we need security here. The call for security was the final insult. Ford stood up slowly, his full height imposing even in the bright studio lights. Security? Really, George? Because I had the audacity to defend myself against your attack. Because I refused to sit quietly while you tried to destroy my reputation. That's your solution. Call security on someone who won't play along with your character assassination. George was now visibly shaking. Whether from anger or fear, it was impossible to tell. You're being threatening and disruptive. This interview is over. Oh, it's over. All right, Ford said, his voice carrying a finality that echoed through the studio. But not because I'm being threatening. It's over because you've been exposed. Because everyone watching can now see exactly what kind of person you really are. You're not a journalist, George. You're a bully with a television show. And today, you picked on the wrong person. Studio security guards were now approaching the set, their faces showing confusion about what exactly they were supposed to be doing. Ford looked at them with disgust. Don't worry, gentlemen. I'm leaving. I wouldn't want to spend another second in the presence of someone who's turned journalism into a blood sport. As Ford removed his microphone and stood to leave, George made one final desperate attempt to have the last word. Harrison, you can storm off if you want, but the questions remain. Your financial arrangements still need to be explained to the American people. Ford stopped at the edge of the set and turned back one last time. The only thing that needs to be explained, George, is how someone like you was ever allowed to represent journalism on national television. And someday, I hope that explanation comes from someone with more integrity than you've shown here today. With that, Harrison Ford walked off the Good Morning America set, leaving behind a stunned studio audience, a shell-shocked host, and a moment of television that would be remembered for years to come. George sat alone at his desk, his carefully constructed facade completely destroyed, while the cameras continued to roll and capture every second of his humiliation. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Ford's footsteps echoing through the studio as he disappeared behind the cameras, leaving George to face the wreckage of what should have been a simple morning show interview. And there you have it, one of the most explosive confrontations in morning television history. What do you think really motivated George's attack on Harrison Ford? Was this really about accountability, or was there something more personal at play? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this.